In Matthew chapter 9, we read of Jesus calling a tax collector named Matthew to be his disciple, one of his disciples, to follow him, he said in those words. In response, this tax collector named Matthew does follow Jesus in every sense of the word, including literally right then, apparently. And he held a banquet of sorts with the Lord as his guest of honor, and his house was filled with many other tax collectors and sinners, the text says in verse 10. Well, as we just read, when the Pharisees saw it, they weren't crazy about that. And they were not really told exactly why the Pharisees, where they were, why they were there, or how exactly they were able to put this question to them or when. But they were obviously in the proximity of the Lord and his disciples, because very cleverly they put a question to his disciples and not him. They hadn't fully learned their lesson yet. This is long before they decided not to ask him any more questions. But on this occasion, they put it to the disciples, which was a pretty crafty move. And they said, "Why does your master eat with sinners?" Well, Jesus overheard the question, or he seems to have overheard. It says that he heard it. Sounds like he just overheard. And he answered them. And among other things, first he responded immediately to their challenge. And basically his answer was, the reason I eat with tax collectors and sinners is because people that are well don't need a doctor. Same reason that a doctor goes to a sick person. Because those are the people that need him. So I eat with sinners because they're the people that need me. But then he said something else. He said this, "Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. For I came not to call the righteous but sinners." Go and learn what this means. Later on, he quoted this same. You could see it's in quotation marks, at least if you have a translation that puts it in quotation marks. He's quoting something, and he brings it up again, and he doesn't put it as directly as "go and learn what this means," but he does say, if you knew what this means, if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Then, among other things, you wouldn't have condemned the guiltless. Think about that. Go and learn what this means. And here's what it was. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. What did he mean by that? What does that mean? What exactly is the Lord saying and teaching here? Well, somebody recently submitted this excellent question in the often neglected box in the front. It's back to me. One of these days I'll call it the front. It's still the back to me. Just to remind you, it's still there. It's right there, directly behind Wayne's head. I see it. I can see right there. That's where it is. If you have a question of any kind that you that you would like to study or hear about, please put it in there. It helps me so much. I can't even. You don't have to put it in there. You can give it to me directly also. But at least if you'd rather write it down anonymously, the more the better. So somebody recently asked this question: What does this mean? Explain what Jesus, the teaching in Matthew 9:13 and 12:7, where Jesus said, "I desire mercy and not sacrifice." What is this? This morning we'll just take a few minutes to do exactly what Jesus challenged the Pharisees to do. Go and learn what this means. First thing we have to do, and the first thing we'll probably notice, as I already pointed out, is that Jesus is quoting somebody. He's quoting a statement. Go and learn what this means. And he didn't say something that he came up with. He's quoting an Old Testament passage. That Old Testament passage is Hosea 6, verse 6. But instead of simply looking at Hosea 6 and verse 6, if we want to go and learn what Hosea 6:6 means, we probably need to go back at least to the first of the chapter, which is going to be verse 1 of chapter 6. Come, Let us return to Jehovah, Hosea says, for he has torn us, that he may heal us. He has struck us down, and he will bind us up. After 2 days, he will revive us. On the 3rd day, he will raise us up, that we may live before him. Let us know. Let us press on to know Jehovah. His going out as sure as the dawn. He will come to us as the showers, as the spring rains that water the earth. Now verse 4, he says, what shall I do with you, O Ephraim? Clearly speaking for God now. This is the prophet Hosea doing the prophet's job, primarily the job, speaking on behalf of God, the words of God. What shall I do with you, O Ephraim? Or his people. What shall I do with you, O Judah? Your love is like a morning cloud, like the dew that goes early away. Therefore I have hewn them by the prophets. I have slain them by the words of my mouth, and my judgment goes forth as the light. For I desire mercy and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. You see, when you go back and read the whole context there, especially beginning in verse 4, it puts a lot of perspective into what the prophet is saying. It puts into perspective things like a lack of God's people. A lack in God's people, that is, not of people, but they were lacking in themselves. We see the perspective of punishment, judgment. God says, I've hewn them by the prophets because something is not right. I've slain them by the words of my mouth. Powerful words in themselves. This is how God operates, or at least he used to operate, and he still does through the word. I have hewn them. How? By the prophets. My people are acting up, I send them prophets. I've slain them by the words of my mouth, and my judgment. Hewn, slain, judgment. For, and here's the quote, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Well, we've got the context. We pick up on some things. We also pick up on the fact that there's another clause in the verse that Jesus leaves out intentionally. It wasn't the part that he had in mind in that instance. But it does help. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God, or I desire the knowledge of God, rather than burnt offerings. It's a good example of the parallelism we've talked about sometimes, especially according to the Hebrew style of writing. Parallelism is not, I guess it's not a fundamentally, inherently, without exception, but there are many times when the second clause of a statement will help you understand the first part of the statement or the verse that may not be clear at all. The first one may be unclear to you as you're reading, but the second one makes it as clear as crystal. This is one of those instances where it's helpful. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I desire the knowledge of God, not burnt offerings. That tells us a couple of things. First, it tells us what kind of sacrifice Hosea is talking about, that God is talking about. And thus, it tells us what kind of sacrifice Jesus is talking about. Sacrifice, burnt offerings, as far as Hosea is concerned. And when Jesus told that to the Pharisees, he's talking about the animal sacrifices of the Old Covenant, strictly speaking. Not some metaphorical kind, which we'll see in a second. Secondly, the parallelism gives us a little bit of commentary on what God does actually desire according to this verse. Mercy, knowledge of God. Those two things may not seem like they're connected at all, but they actually very much are. They are very connected. They may not be exactly the same thing, but they are interwoven with one another. And at least in reading the verse, that helps us to see a little bit. Doesn't give us the answer, what exactly is Jesus teaching here, but it gets us a little bit closer. So what exactly does that mean then? Let's take a closer look at the word itself. Another important piece. When we want to know what a teaching of the Bible is, sometimes you got to look at the word. The Hebrew word translated mercy, which by the way varies by translation quite a bit. Mercy is the older version. The Old King James says mercy. The New King James says mercy. The Old ASV has goodness there. I desire goodness. I desire, ESV says steadfast love. Faithful love, another one says. Kindness, loyalty, and so on and so forth. The word itself means kindness, mercy, goodness, faithfulness, love. Some other commentators said it is to love one's neighbor. What God is talking about here is the idea of loving one's neighbor, manifesting itself in righteousness, love which has its roots in the knowledge of God. There's your connection with the knowledge of God. Knowledge of God should automatically translate itself into upright behavior, treating other people in the way that God would have us to treat other people. Loving one's neighbor. Very reminiscent of what the rich ruler said, actually, in Mark 12. We'll see that in just a few minutes. To love one's neighbor. That's what God is saying that He desires. Mercy in itself is something maybe that we're over-specific about it in our own vernacular. Well, what about in the New Testament when Jesus quotes those passages? He didn't quote it in Hebrew, and certainly Matthew didn't record it in Hebrew. But in Greek, the Greek word is eleos, which means goodness. General goodness, kindness or goodwill, another says, joined with a desire to help them. This is what God is saying He desires. Goodness. What did He mean, though, when He said, not sacrifice? I desire goodness, not sacrifice. That almost can lead somebody to think or to understand God as saying that He doesn't really care at all. He does not want that. Just like if you at a restaurant or something, you ordered something and they brought you something else, you would want this thing that you ordered. I don't want this at all. But God is saying something a little, not necessarily saying that. Before we can determine what it means, sometimes it's helpful to see some things it doesn't mean. What does it not mean? Well, first of all, it does not mean that God did not want people to offer sacrifices under the Old Covenant. That is not what God is saying. That wouldn't even make sense, would it? Who is it? It wasn't, Moses didn't come up with that. God didn't tell Moses, now I want you to go down and write on these tablets and tell the people, tell the Levites, for the people to just love one another with the steadfast love that I have, and go about your lives as I would have you to do. Love one another, treat each other nicely, and then Moses just decided, but I want people to kill all these animals, so I'm going to make up that they need to offer these. God is the one that told them that. God told them to do. He commanded them to. He commanded animal sacrifice. So clearly, animal sacrifice was God's will. It wouldn't make sense for God to then turn and say, "What are you doing offering these animals? I don't want this." The people would turn and say, God, you're the one that, you think we want to do this? You told us to do this. So, first of all, it does not mean that God did not at all want them to offer animal sacrifices. As an institution or as a practice, He's not saying, I do not want animal sacrifice as a concept. What He is saying in that connection is that these offerings become an abomination to Him when they are done insincerely, when they're done hypocritically. That's what He's talking about more specifically. But number two, what it does not mean is that God does not want people to make personal sacrifices today. So in the context of Hosea, the statement does not mean that God didn't want animal sacrifice. In the context of Matthew, it does not mean that God doesn't want people to make what we call sacrifices today. Not animal sacrifices, but any kind of sacrifice. It would be a total twisting of Jesus' words and Hosea's words to take from Matthew 9:13 that God does not want people to make any sacrifices at all, ever. And then point to Matthew 9:13 and say, look, God said, I don't want sacrifice. So why are you telling people you got to make sacrifices? That is twisting God's word. In fact, the Lord himself elsewhere taught that those kinds of sacrifices are not only pleasing to God, they're necessary in order to follow him. If anyone wants to come after me, let him take up his cross, deny himself. That's a sacrifice right there. Deny yourself, take up his cross, follow me. You could argue that all of those are sacrifices, or at least include them. So it does not mean that people are not to make sacrifices. So what does it mean? One commentator said, and I couldn't put it any better, he said, not only were God's people disloyal, but their priorities were misplaced. This verse reveals their belief that as long as they offered sacrifices, they'd be pleasing to God. These words make clear that sacrifices offered without a meaningful relationship with God become empty rituals. That is what God is trying to tell them. It's not that God did not want animal sacrifices. It's that he didn't want their animal sacrifices. He told them that in other places too, which we'll see again in just a second. Their sacrifices. If it's going to be between, it's not, God is not pleased with animal sacrifice for the sake of it. It ruins it, taints it, spoils it. Another commentator said, God doesn't want our relationship with him to be one of shallow, transient feelings and empty words and rituals. A superficial ritual can never take the place of sincere love and faithful obedience. There's the idea again. What God wants is in here. It's not the only thing he wants, but it's what is most important. You can have a good heart. Your heart can be right in the right place, and your action be wrong. But you can't have your heart wrong and your action be right. It's impossible. Can't be done. If your heart's wrong, no action you do is right, because it's coming from the wrong place. So, therefore, this is the most important, obviously, because it can make or break everything that you do. God is trying to tell them, you think that just because you do these external things that you're right. Remember who Jesus was talking to. The pompous, self-righteous Pharisees that thought they were the best thing on God's green earth. They were the most righteous, holy, devout, godly men that have ever walked the earth. And yet, it's hard to imagine being farther from the truth. You know why? Their hearts were as black as ink, as dead as anything. And Jesus told them that too. You wash the outside, you make it look all pretty, dead inside. Totally dead. God is trying to tell them through Hosea, the people of God through Hosea, sacrifices, you're missing the point. You got to be right, faithful. Goodness is what I really want, not empty, vain sacrifice. We referred to Mark chapter 12, verse 32 and 33. Remember what the response to the Lord was? He said, "You're right, teacher. You have truly said that God is one. There is no other besides him. And to love him with all the heart and with all the understanding and with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself, is much more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices." Ding, ding, ding. There, he nailed it. It's much more. He got this one right, this man. But I believe that we'd be hard-pressed to find a better answer to what Hosea 6:6 means than 1 Samuel 15:22. When Saul had disobeyed God's command, Samuel came to him with some bad news. But in the midst of that, he also declared some hard truths that he needed to learn in a spiritual sense, general spiritual truths. And he said it like this: Has Jehovah as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of Jehovah? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. Now, in the immediate context, that's because they were supposed to destroy all the animals and everything, and Saul did not do that. He kept a lot of the good, what he called the good stuff, and then he tried to blame it on the people and everything, and he tried to justify it by saying, we're offering these to Jehovah. Doesn't he like that kind of thing? Samuel says, just as God said through Hosea, you missed the point entirely. You think God is going to care? You think that's going to please God? When God told you to destroy those things, to devote them to destruction with the rest? No. To obey is better than what you think God would want. And to listen to God, to do what He said, here's that parallelism again. Listen, obey, means the same thing, than the fat of rams. That's exactly what it meant. Just another extension of it. Goodness, mercy, obedience. There are things that God desires more than rituals and external acts. God, it's not to say He's not pleased with them, but the heart's got to be right. With the Pharisees, heart wasn't right. So even though they were going through with the externals, some of them at least, that God had commanded and required of them, meant nothing. So once we understand that concept of mercy and sacrifice, it unlocks the meaning of that statement itself in those verses. God's declaring an unchanging truth about Himself. This is what He wants. What He wants really is to just for you to do what He has said. Isaiah, God again through Isaiah, declared a warning that it rings just as much for us as it did for them. What to me is the multitude of your sacrifices? I have had enough of burnt offerings of rams and the fat of well-fed beasts. I do not delight in the blood of bulls or of lambs or of goats. Bring no more vain offerings. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Sabbath and the calling of convocations. I cannot endure iniquity and solemn assembly. Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean. Remove the evil of your deeds from before my eyes. Cease to do evil, learn to do good. Seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. That's what God is saying in those places. Here and the other verses. And boy, does that not apply to us just as much as to Old Testament Israel? With the exception of animal sacrifice, of course. What does it mean to me? God is not pleased with and does not accept any offerings or sacrifices that we make if our lives are not right with Him. If we would have our worship, and by the way, worship is one of the primary things we offer God. Every Lord's Day, it's one of our offerings. Even in the Old Covenant period, the Lord Himself referred to worship, bring an offering, and that was part of their worship in a way. Offering worship, that's one of the things we offer God as well. One of the main things. God will not accept it. It's not pleasing to Him if our lives and hearts are not right with Him. If we're not doing what God has said, He doesn't want our prayer, our hymns, our worship, our praise. He wants it, but it's unacceptable. Goodness first. Righteousness, faithfulness first. Then the offerings are acceptable. If we would have our worship, our offerings, and ourselves acceptable and pleasing to God, we must live according to His Word. It's what Jesus meant in Matthew 9:13. It's what Hosea meant in Hosea 6:6. And it's what we ought to mean to do in our lives. Starting now. What about you? Which camp are you in? Are you in the camp? Would God write you? Would God send you a prophet saying, quit it? Why are you here? If it was, in the Christian age, it wouldn't be why you offer any sacrifices. Why are you here on Sunday morning? You don't think of me. As soon as you walk out these doors, you're going to stop thinking about me. You're going to leave your Bible in the pew. Why do you even come? For a lot of people, it's because they think that's what God, that's the thing. You go to church on Sunday. Everything else is whatever. Well, what Matthew 9:13 and Hosea 6:6 and all those other passages related to it are saying is that is wrong. So are you offering vain sacrifices? They're an abomination to God. Get your heart right. Get your priorities straight. And then your offerings and sacrifices are a sweet-smelling aroma to God always. And you yourself will be pleasing and acceptable to Him.